Okay, so we've got some new faces here today. So I thought I'd give a quick introduction as to how the Urban Health Council has really come about. So behind the Urban Health Council is Centric Lab. We are a neuroscience research lab. I guess you can actually read for yourselves there. We're creating strategies to improve public health. We've been going since 2017. We've predominantly been based in London and the UK, but we've worked across the world with different clients remotely for the most part of that. We have a partnership with University College London, which is how we get to meet great people like Marie, who's going to be one of our speakers today. What we do at Centric, so we're a research lab that focuses on using neuroscience and geospatial data to understand how the places we live impact our health. We apply our research through 4 different platforms, and you can see them here on the screen, of awareness, education, action, and consultancy, with the goal to improve public health. I think one of the big sort of brand messages that we like to put out is that we use science to create equitable healing futures. One of the things that fits within education is the Urban Health Council, which we started at the beginning of this year. And the Urban Health Council exists to bring new players to the conversation of public health. The conversation of public health is really kept in the domains of epidemiology and sometimes GPs, but not enough is really discussed about how the role of where we live influences health. And that's really what we're here to do, is to create a platform that brings together different organizations who may not feel that they are the leaders of public health, but actually they are, and they should be the ones driving either new practice changes, new policy changes, or different awareness from a citizen level. And we've been going throughout the year. We are primarily a citizen and public grant funded nonprofit program. The reason that we are able to be primarily citizen funded is that it helps us keep our science independent, that we're not held through any restrictions in any way. We are also supported, as you can see, some fantastic logos in the bottom right-hand corner. So a lot of the Urban Health Council wouldn't have been possible without the National Lottery Community Fund, whose support has enabled us to further the work in communities and health and really start delivering equitable healing futures, as well as the main program sponsors of Lend-Lease, whose big ambitions to build places for people to thrive, but also not forgetting the great organizations that you can see there, from other developers to managers to urban planners, architectural practices, as well as interesting organizations about like the Human Nature Partnership, who have all in this first year been the sort of pioneers in supporting us push this forward. So many of you who've joined for the first time, if you do like us, if you do like what's going on, please do consider going to urbanhealthcouncil.com/support and contributing as best as you can to help this stay open to as many people as possible. And I know many people already have. So what is urban health? And this is a working definition. It's a term used to investigate the intersectional lived experience of urban dwellers. Focuses on the unique influence of urbanization and that has on our biological systems through exposure to environmental and psychosocial stresses. So that's what urban health is in particular, is really understanding the influence of urbanization on our biological systems. The goal of the Urban Health Council, as you can see here, is to reframe health principally, provide a great public health service to reach out to people who may not have great access to this information, but should. And we're committed to playing our role in reducing health inequities and creating a wider ecosystem. So that's what we're here to do. Support practitioners, make better decisions, support policymakers, create great policy through great evidence, support citizens, build the tools and information so that they can engage in a more equitable lens. So one of the main things that the Urban Health Council does, and hopefully you can see, hopefully you have all been able to see my screen, is the different reports. That is the primary output of what the Urban Health Council is there to do, is to build this solid knowledge base that allows people to delve into important information. Every report is produced by our in-house science team, and we also bring in some experts to help support them along the way. For today's purpose, so all of these are available to read online alongside a health lexicon, which is a shorter, sharper way to understand certain key terminologies around the conversations of public health and health justice. And so for today's conversation, we're going to be speaking about how to equitably engage with community expertise. And it's at this point that I'm going to pass over to Araceli, who's going to be leading the conversation with Marie and Charlotte, I believe, is dropping in at some point. But Araceli, over to you.
Great, thanks for that. So I wanted to start with a deep breath. So everyone just take a deep breath. Because these Zoom calls suck. So let's try to be mindful and in the moment and just think about, this is the only thing that we have to do right now is understand the equitable engagement with communities. So we often hear the term engagement being used, but we wanted to add equitability to the front of it because engagement can be simply an interaction, but we want to take it even further into relationship, into being in relationship with communities. And if you're going to be in relation with communities, you have to do it equitably. You cannot have any relationship with communities or otherwise if there isn't an equitability to them. So the first in regards to health is that the purpose and the goal of the engagement should not be determined by the outsider. The outsider can be a researcher, a scientist, or any practitioner trying to understand things within a community base. But it should be in cohort with the community. The community's interest should be at the core of the engagement and at every decision point. So instead of coming in and thinking, this is what I need to know, and this is what my organization needs to find out, it's more of going into the community and saying, okay, this is the subject matter. What are your interests in that? What is already your knowledge base in this? Because oftentimes as practitioners, we assume that a community does not have a working baseline for certain terminology, for certain concepts. And quite often they do. Three, is that there must be a mutual benefit for both parties, that there isn't just science or practice in an extractivist manner, i.e. that we go in, we extract the information that we need, and we never relay back why we did it, what were the results, how does it affect them, and we disappear, right? We disappear because we finish our PhD, or we finished our research piece, or we finish a piece of quote unquote community engagement, and they never see us again. So it is about more of being in relationship with the community and the actual principles that go with it. Next slide, please. So why is this significant? We identified three things. The first thing is efficacy. So in past workshops, and the last one, we really went into what is the expertise of communities. Communities hold incredible expertise because they are in those environments day in and day out. So when you are in constant contact with anything, with any phenomena, you do start developing your own expertise, and more importantly, your own nuanced perspective on the phenomena. And so if we bring in the community, we start to have more effective science or research and more accuracy within it, because then we also get we also get the opportunity to bring in that expertise and that nuance that comes from the communities. The second is healing futures, and it's really important that we look at the S, right? That it's not just one healing future, is that there are multiples. Communities across the world, because depending on culture and habitat and practices, they have their own specific ways on how to heal that are obviously in context to them, but we can also learn from them. And so if we go in there with, I guess, the humility that there are multiple futures, there are multiple knowledges and practices, then we can get to the healing faster, that we are properly collaborating and exchanging information. And the final is equitability. that we need to move away from a supremacy and paternalistic model. So by that I mean is that, again, we, from a scientific perspective, and Marie can back me up on this, that you are often told that there is some sort of elitism within being a scientist, right? That we maybe hold a better prowess academically, or a certain, or that not everybody's good at science. And the same thing for other profession, or the word even expertise. Once we become an expert, it does put us on this pedestal. And that being on that pedestal, being above someone, immediately erases equitability. And we don't want that. It is, like I said, it delays progress, it delays change, it delays our healing. So equitability means that we go in as partners in relation, rather than as experts or scientists or practitioners. Okay, next slide, please. So in this report, which was written by Marie and Charlotte, who will be joining us in a little bit, they are both neuroscientists. And it was also in participation with Elon Kelman and a lab in Scotland called Public Health Lab. And they helped us bring together, bring together the entire report. And based on our investigations and conversations with them, these principles were detailed out. We're not going to go through all of them in detail. We're going to look at 3, but this is the list: collectivity, self-awareness, honesty, flexibility, reciprocity and mutualism, longevity, community sovereignty, trust, and consent. And as you can see, these are principles, which means that we're not giving you necessarily the nitty-gritty methods of, okay, so first you go and you knock on people's doors, and then you create a survey that needs to look like this with this amount of questions, and the questions need to be detailed like this. And then from there, you're going to collect the data in this manner. Because number one, there's a lot of methodologies that we include in the report that you can just simply go and access. But also number 2 is that all of these practices have to be in the context of the community that you're engaging with. So the tools and the methods and the analysis that are chosen has to be, number 1, in the context of the community, but also chosen with the community. So that's why we're not giving you that A to B to C methodology. Secondly, I think it does seem that within these conversations, we never talk about how to think about science or how to think about health. So we wanted to create this time and space to be able to do that. So the next part, I'm going to go into 3 of the principles. We're going to take 5 minutes. So I'm going to pass on the ball to Marie. I'll define it, then I'll ask Marie some questions, and then we're going to open it up for the next 10 minutes to you guys. So what you guys think of the concept, what y'all think is missing, and also have you seen it in practice in some of your work? So can I have the next slide, please? So the first one that we're going to look at is collectivity. So collectivity can be defined as the experience or feeling of sharing responsibilities, experiences, or activities. In the context of equitable engagement, it means working collectively, i.e. as a group, towards a specific goal. So Marie, what were some of your thoughts in your discussions with Charlotte as to why is collectivity such a significant principle to bring forward?
Oh, I can't see the slides. And hello, by the way.
I've taken the slides off.
I thought because I pressed the button unmute and then the slides were gone. So I was like, this is interesting. Power. So yeah, collectivity. So I guess because obviously when we say us as the outsiders and then the community, so we have 2 parties, more or less. But then, those two, of course, need to build a collective first. So this is something, otherwise we can't work together, right? This is the first thing. But then something that, especially Charlotte, who has worked with communities, has a bit more practical experience. She said it's really, really important to understand that the community is then not this one homogeneous entity, which is just this one group and everyone's sort of the same because they are the community, but then that we have these sub-communities and subgroups within that bigger community. So the community shares something, anything. It could be the area they live in, so the geography, it could be a shared interest, anything that is shared or common sort of defines the community. But then say it is a neighborhood, so the community is a community because they live in a neighborhood and, for example, they experience high levels of air pollution and are impacted by that. So that makes them a community. But then remember that still it's so diverse, so that we don't forget that. So if we want to build a collective, we cannot just go there, ask 1-2 people to kind of contribute to our project, but identify ideally with them because they know their community better, who lives there, and how can we build a really representative collective that is not just the outsider, the community, but really, considers all the different people. It's of course difficult to represent everyone. It probably is impossible to do that perfectly, but to be aware and try to achieve that was something that we came up with is really important.
Great, thank you. Yeah, so it's that we start the conversation, as you said, that the collective is us coming in as researchers and also the community, and that the community we understand is both sharing an experience, but they're also sharing the experience as individuals, right? So the people that are identified as women or male or children or of different racialized backgrounds, each one of them will have very specific experiences. Also, depending on how you divide your time and space within that community can also give you a different subcategory. And the thing is that we do this type of rationale and thinking when we're meeting new people, but something, I don't know what happens when we put our hats on as practitioners, that we forget, number one, that we're citizens. Like, we are community and we are citizens, and we forget that when we put the hat on of expertise. So does anybody want to contribute any thoughts on this idea of building the collective and in how this can be seen in practice? So I'll open it up to that, and then if not, we'll come in and give a specific case study on collectivity. Priya, I think I saw your hand.
Yeah, hi everyone. So I actually work in engagement, and I do this on a daily basis, my day job. And I agree with everything that you've just said. I read the full report this morning, fully agree with that. I think in reality, it is really hard to have a very diverse collective. I know when we do our kind of stakeholder engagement and research, we try to, pull together as many diverse groups as possible. But the problem is that we're often restricted by what our clients want us to do, the developers that we're working with. And I think they often have their own timescales. For example, they have to get, their planning application in within 9 months. That doesn't leave much room to have full diverse engagement, especially, when you're really restricted with these timescales. And often, developers have restrictions with regards to what they can actually change and have determined by the community in their development plans. So I know I was working on a project with Lendlease where they said, they can comment on certain community features, but the actual design itself is pretty much fixed. And I think that probably needs to be set out fairly early on, is, what are the parameters for engagement, from the community? Otherwise, it's going to really increase expectations. And I think in order for this to be very open and transparent, you need to manage expectations in this process. So I think that's something that I've recognized. And I think it's always a sort of battle with the client where, you know, because of their restrictions, it's very hard to then impose our views and say, look, as community practitioners, we think this is how you should do engagement, but they've got their own agenda. So I think in reality, it's very hard to actually apply. So I just wanted to share that.
Thank you so much for that, Priya. Yeah, I mean, when we created the principles or even at the very beginning of the paternalistic model and the supremacy model, this is something that we have to break across the board, right? That it isn't yet, because as at a practitioner level, but then if you have another top-down factor that is influencing that, we have to break that there. And then if that gets influenced by policy or other top-down factors, we have to break that there as well. And it's learning, that's what we were saying about learning how to rethink things, right? That we're so used to extractivism everywhere. We extract from communities, we extract from nature, we extract from people. Like, what can we get from you, or what can we get from one another? And it's, yeah, maybe, you know, it'll take a while, but it is approaching clients and saying, you are not going to even get what you want if you are going this way. And they, a lot of times, because we do the same, and they don't, they end up completely misunderstanding who they have in front of them, because they come in with so much, also so much assumption. Marie? Oh, Marie and then Rob, I think I saw.
Yeah, just a quick follow-up question for Priya, because I come from a very theoretical perspective, right? As a scientist, not a practitioner, I haven't worked with communities, so I did all the research and discussed with Charlotte a lot, but of course the practical perspective, the kind of the realistic perspective is really important, right? So I guess that's why it's principled. So ideally this would be happening and should be in any context. So I was just wondering, the clients that approach you, so why do they approach you? What is their goal when they ask you to do community engagement? What do they actually want to get from that? Is it for the community? Is it something they have to do to take a box? So, you know, what is their main goal when they ask you to do?
I think it really varies with different developers and different clients. I think, you know, the benchmark is that all developers, you know, for planning applications of a certain size have to do community engagement because it's statutory. So that is the kind of, they is to a certain extent a tick box exercise. But then there are other developers who are genuinely passionate about incorporating the community's views into their plans, because they know that they're going to be long-term neighbours in that community. There is no point just building something which hasn't taken views of, you know, local characteristics, diverse opinions, and so on, because of the backlash that they're going to get. And if they want to make this a kind of easy process for themselves, it's genuinely in their interest to actually go out and do that engagement. So I think it's very much a spectrum dependent on how easy they think they are going to get their planning application over the line. Because obviously the more activities that they want to do, the more engagement, the more tailored that they want it to be, the more expensive it is. So I think it's dependent on so many factors, on you know, how easy they think that planning application will get over the line, viability, restrictions, budget. There's so much to consider when it comes to the actual application of these of something like this.
Cool, thank you so much for that, Priya. Rob?
Yeah, we're working with two particular groups at the moment where there are third-party obstacles to the collectivity. So third-party supremacy, I know you've used the term paternalistic, but we have also used the term maternalistic. They are slightly different, as you can probably imagine, sometimes majorly different. And what we've had to do is to create avatars for the experience holders to get somewhere close to how the experience can be turned into expertise, and how we can actually say to these people who have the experience that that means they actually have expertise as well. So whilst the collectivity that I've seen with what you're doing is sort of like between two parties. The real problem for us comes when there's a third party obstacle in their way. And that particularly happens in mental health. So you can imagine the maternalistic view coming with mental health, but also there's just obstinacy. But one of the areas where we're working at the moment is with that has language difficulties because they are in a different country. And everyone's going in with the view that we know better and not allowing us to actually talk to, I don't know if anyone knows the term Dalits, but in India, they are the lowest of the low caste. And because they are the lowest of the low, no one thinks that they should be spoken to at all. So if we can bring this area of third-party collectivity as well, and how we can actually get around that, I'd be so grateful.
Yes, and I'm sure communities would be as well. Does any, Charlotte, you don't have to go in straight in because I know you're just coming into the conversation, but if you do have something to add under collectivity and your thoughts on how you deciphered and identified the principle.
Sorry, I'm just trying to get my head in. Yeah, I think that it's just basically really important to have everyone around the table with an equal voice, and for everyone to feel like their presence is just as valuable as everyone else. And I think you know, seeing it as a collective is a good way to kind of set up the framing for that.
Cool. Does anybody, thank you for that, Charlotte. Does anybody else want to add something else? Because then we can, oh, sorry, Sophie, Sophie.
You're right. It's certainly something I've come across. So as a civil servant 15 years now, I kind of work with real estate companies and a variety of other people. But there's that really key point of understanding the different forms of expertise, just a flag. So certainly in my days of sort of policy making in central government, one of the key challenges was where policy officials felt that they were the expert. They were the expert on creating public policy and legislation. They weren't the expert on the content and what it should actually include. The perspective I always took was, this is what I know, and it's a tiny bit of the much bigger piece. So who are all the other people I need to include as part of this conversation to get an outcome which is kind of sensible and can move things forward? So I'll just leave that there.
Okay, cool. Thank you for that, Sophie. Yeah, I think the what you said about the output, that also has to be part of that initial collective. So if anybody wants to interrupt, go ahead. If Josh, you can look out for hands. So we can now look at some case studies. So there's a problem. So I would say there's two ways. So one is that there's been a long history, for example, with Indigenous communities in relationship to health, in two pathways there. One, in discovering their own health practices, but also B, in investigating how their health is affected by things like colonialism and land theft, etc. And there's a notion that the researcher comes in with their own specific objective of the question, without understanding that, number one, that question probably has already been asked by the community. Number two, the community might already have a baseline of understanding of what that question is. And so when you look at the report, one of the researchers that we look into, she calls it who owns the problem. And so that researchers time and time again will go and ask a question, especially with the communities that are really in vogue. Like I'm talking now bigger research rather than like specific research. And they get told off, researchers get told off, like this is the third time or fifth time that a researcher has come and asked us this question. And actually we already have a solution for it, but nobody thinks about that. So in that collectivity is that the problem, the question, the investigation has to be in cohort with the community. And I know that that is a pain in the butt for the developers that think, well, what I want to know is X, Y, Z. Technically, from a scientific perspective or an investigation perspective, to already go with a very specific set of questions, because you're already, essentially what you're doing is asking rhetorical questions, is not a really good method of practice. And then the other example is wait to be invited. I mean, when we have worked with communities, Cash, they approached us on Twitter. And so we were invited in, but the first thing that we asked them is, where are you? Where are you in your research? Where is your understanding? So now we know where we can come in and fill in those gaps. And again, enter in a long-term relationship with you. We recently are starting our relationship with Wally's Quarry, which I don't know if you guys know what's happening up in the north. And they have successfully sued their line or their branch of the environmental agency for a poor assessment and community assessment of air pollution and how air pollution is affecting the community. So big consequences can come when we don't do this correctly. And we asked for permission. We said, here is what we looked at. Would you like to continue the conversation? It's okay if you don't. And again, so now whatever starts to, the next steps that come from that, it's within the community. So the community then got in touch with us and we're going to continue on the next steps of, okay, we actually, and what we got was, we have addressed so many of your points. We now need the next thing, which is where we're going to come in and hopefully be of some use to them in their process of work. Now, we are very aware that we're in a very different situation. As Rob said, we don't have a third party, or from Priya's perspective, we don't have a client. The community is our client. So I do know that that will be different for many of you on the call. But does anybody want to also share a case study or an experience where you have built a collective? Charlotte, I'm going to possibly pass it on to you as well, because I think you've done some amazing work at building collectives in a very long-term relationship with communities like Grenfell.
I mean, like we talked about in the report, there's a lot of, I think a lot of it comes from like your attitude, and you know, all of the different principles that we talked about are interrelated. And I think, for example, one of the projects that I'm doing at the moment is working with a group of people who are affected by gang violence, and they're quite a culturally diverse kind of group of people, and yeah, so I think the main things of how we're kind of approaching it is, number one, like having a diverse team of people, and also very much yeah, it is like a collective thing. It's not us saying, oh, we want to do this, like, what do you think? It's very much kind of, this is what we can offer, what of that is useful to you, what would you like, or nothing. If you don't want anything, that's fine. But you know, it's a conversation where we develop things together, and very much work with each other to, and you know, all bring in our expertise to kind of develop something which is, you know, which is addressing something which they care about or feel that they need.
Cool. And has there been any like setbacks or times where you've been like, oh, good thing that we got that feedback because we were going to go left rather than right?
Loads. Oh my God, so many. I mean, even so, there's loads of stuff that you know, so we're basically going to be doing like virtual reality wellbeing sessions, and it's a group of women. Well, I mean, there's so many things. I mean, first of all, you know, the people, they said they just wanted women present. The space that we originally managed to get to run the sessions was inappropriate because it was like right next to a place where like a lot of the people from the gangs hang out, and we didn't know that. Another place that we thought might be a good place to hold it was actually in a building that there's police in the building, and if they'd been seen going in and out of that building, it might have been perceived that they were like being snitches or whatever, which obviously we didn't have any idea about that. So there's so many things that we just had no idea because we're not in their situation.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you for that, Charlotte. Marie, we're going to close Collectivity out. So do you want to add anything to the subject and perhaps any thoughts on the work that you led on Wally's Quarry?
Well, it would be so much, I guess, but I think it was just for me as a scientist, it was just really interesting to approach a problem from in a very different way, approaching the community, essentially sharing our thoughts on the problems that we identified, how the Environment Agency, Public Health England and others communicated science, which we found inaccurate in parts, but basically approaching them to just offer help. And for me, obviously, I got something out of it because it was really interesting to think about things in a different way. But there was no I didn't really directly gain, or we didn't really directly gain anything from this approach. And I found that for me personally, it was just a really good experience because it's very different from what I do in my PhD research. Yeah, but I mean, it would be so much more I could say about that. Maybe we move on to the next principle.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so so to put it into context, Wally's Quarry is a landfill site in the north of England, and they are facing daily air pollution from the landfill that is making their community sick. And we attended one of their open meetings. And then we also went in and, well, I say we, Marie read in detail the transcripts and exchanges between the different organizations and with the community. And we found a lot of places where communication could have been better, the support could have been better. And that is what we have presented to the community to then see, as Charlotte says, how else can we support you? But unfortunately, in this case, and in many communities like that, we often feel that they are on their own, and the top-down maternalistic elements are not listening. Okay, so the next principle, may I have flexibility, please, Josh?
If I can just say for a second,
Sure.
I put in the chat the open letter that we produce, which is the summation, which effectively is a form of research study, which is declaring the inaccuracies coming from the institutions to the communities. I've put that in the chat, which anyone can read if they want to understand more of the approaches to that. And just to say, Wally's Quarry is based in Staffordshire and Newcastle-under-Lyme.
Thank you, because my dyslexic head was not going to remember any of those names. Okie doke. So now flexibility. Okay, so this is a set plan. So sorry, the idea in oh, Jesus. Charlotte already started with it, that you come in with a set plan, right? You come in with an objective, you come in with questions, you come in with curiosities perhaps as well. And you go, this is my game plan. I've set it all out, how I'm going to approach, how I'm going to address the questions, and even as Charlotte pointed out, where I'm going to conduct the research and at what time I'm going to conduct the research. Everything gets planned out, mainly because I think all of us that are in a research capacity, we love being very organized. But then that can impede, and if we're working in collectivity, and we're coming in with an inflexibility, with a very drawn out plan that we're not going to move from, that creates this friction. And that's what we're introducing, is that having the flexibility, that once we enter the ecosystem of the community and we are in relation, we are in a collective with a community, that so many of the elements might change. We might find out that there are languages that we didn't anticipate, and we might need to bring in a translator. We might find out that some of the methods that we're using may be alienating or can socially ostracize some of the people that we want to be in conversation with. We might find out, again, that the question that we are looking at is not a question that really is of interest anymore to the community. The community is somewhere further down the line, or that the community itself has other different questions. So in the case of the top-down, the people that work in top-down organizations like developers or health organizations, you might come in thinking, well, I want to investigate this because this might be a health risk factor to the community, or I want to investigate how the community is interacting maybe with a new park that has been set out for them. And within that, they might miss a bigger element within the community that could be affecting their health. So it is having, we're talking mental flexibility more than anything, about coming in and learning, or as it's said here, the willingness to listen, to learn, and be proven wrong, to then adapt. And I know that sometimes with time constrictions, 3/4 of the way in to then go, oh man, we just asked the wrong question, or the methods are wrong, can be really daunting, because all of us work under budgets and time constrictions. And that, like I said, can be daunting, can be difficult, but it is necessary that from the very, it is necessary. So then the very beginning, we build in that flexibility within the collective to go, okay, how do we ask these questions? How do we build in time for that flexibility? How do we build in time to possibly be wrong and have to make adjustments along the way? So again, here, I'm going to pass it over to Charlotte first. In writing flexibility, are there points from your research and your research work that you think perhaps you weren't as flexible to begin with, and then that almost you had to learn the hard way to bring in that flexibility?
Well, I think in a more general term, I was like, however many years ago, very much worked in university settings and was running studies that were very, you do it a specific way, and it's very formal, and there's a set of rules, and you learn how to like certain methodology, and you don't deviate from that. And I think also I was very much focused on like quantitative data. I did a lot of EEG, and I was very, did a lot of stuff like I didn't really do a lot of work that kind of incorporated kind of more qualitative like conversations with people. It was a lot, it was, you know, statistics and you know, so I think, yeah, over time I've definitely, you know, done a lot. My work's moved very much. I'd still work for universities and do that research, but I've definitely become way more flexible in my whole approach, because and definitely like value, you know, the actual real life stuff more. Yeah, so I think overall, looking back, I think I was definitely, I disagree with how I definitely focused too much on the kind of statistics data side of things, which now I don't as much at all. As we've outlined in the report, there's, you know, it can be problematic. It's useful in certain times, but you have to think about the context and the limitations of those methodologies.
Yeah. I know that we hit some operative words in Daniel's brain of data, methodologies, context. So I don't know if you want to say anything with that, Dan. You don't have to.
No, I mean, I guess it's as we've been talking about, it's kind of a counterbalance to the to the work and kind of the writing and stuff that I'm working on for next quarter is about, like, you know, it's kind of how you're cognizant about that balance and how you understand, because because a lot of those terms like context, you know, are key, and being and kind of allowing the space to be flexible and to be able to say, like, if data is just a building block, you know, but the idea you're coming in with the intentions of solving a problem and understanding a community, then those blocks should never be more than, you know, than the needs of the community. And just in the same way that if you're talking about constructing a house, right, you would still look at the features people need. You think about accessibility. You wouldn't come in and say, I have bricks, I have, you know, I have steel beams, and I have a handful of other things. What I'm going to use this for this, because that's not actually going to become an effective home for whoever is going to live in it. So it's kind of the way I kind of see it, it's kind of similar. And I think it's nice when people have, and especially teams, have the ability to have both, and when both can be introduced to communities in a way that's not condescending. So rather than just saying, oh, you wouldn't know that term, you don't have a PhD, or you wouldn't know that term, you're not an MSc, look at it and say, well, if I brought this up, this has to be related to what you're doing. Otherwise, I shouldn't bring it up, regardless of how good it looks on my papers. You know, so that, yeah, so I definitely agree with a lot of, and I've kind of had a similar transition to Charlotte, where it's like, you know, starting from the neuroimaging and more EEG side, and, you know, but I kind of fluctuate, which is why I do what I do now. So
cool. Does anybody have, or does anybody, I should say, does anybody want to share a story of how flexibility/inflexibility played a role within a project? Yeah, Rob?
Yeah, one of the works that we're doing with a university really highlighted this with actually their mantra. We've always tried to front load the flexibility so that we didn't have to and use sort of like a mind map approach rather than a linear. But some of the terms that they actually came up with, their mantra is observe, wonder, explore. So you're not actually developing any sort of plan until well down the line of what you're actually doing. And that saves so much waste, so much money, so much trust. If you go in straight off with a plan, you're not going to be trusted. If you actually allow the plan to be collectively grown, then you will be. And I was really surprised that this university had this approach. Most universities are more dictatorial in how things should be done.
Right, that's really useful. Thank you, Rob, for the, can you repeat again? It's wonder?
Yeah, it's observe, wonder, explore.
Nice. Yeah. So all very open words that keep you in a sense of, really in a sense of doubt, right? Because wonderment, you're always looking at what is next and making yourself more available for that observation. So from our perspective, we had one of the most amazing, it really actually spun a whole area of research that we are looking to explore next year. But we got approached on Twitter by a person who is looking at air pollution in their neighborhood. And her question was, are GPs looking, or do GPs have access to air pollution data? And are they using it? i.e., if you were a GP and you knew that your neighborhood had high levels of air pollution, you might want to prepare yourself for increased asthma attacks in children or increased diagnosis of asthma, also things like hypertension, and or miscarriages. And I said to her, obviously, that no, we were not looking at GPs just yet. And so that really sparked a whole conversation within Centric of how do we get more of this information to citizens so they can then draw the line to GPs, and how do we, again, create more of a collective with the various practitioners. And what we loved about that example and what that really taught us is that if we took a step down as experts and we simply listened to, in this case, to social media and what people have to say, your research just moves so much faster. And you're like, yeah, of course a GP should have access to some of the data maps that we have and how much that would really benefit. And then we heard it again at Wally's Quarry, where they were asking for their GPs to recognize that the landfill could be a health risk, just like any other health risks that could come into the community. And so that's really colored so much of our intention and of our work. And to be fair, it really could have never come to us in as Rob was saying, in a linear planned way. It came to us very spontaneously. And the point is, yeah, to stay in that wonderment and in observation. Does anybody have any other case study or thoughts on flexibility?
I just wanted to add one thing that I think the tricky part with NHS, and this is something that Rob and I have talked a lot about, is the fact that it's the principles of surviving and moving forward in the NHS is basically everything against the principles of wonderment and observation. So you would not get, like, it's kind of like trying to do stuff in America where in health where litigation is real. So you could never bring that up as a reason why you did something. So let's say you wanted to benefit a community and say, yeah, we can share that, and that way I can be more informed. If like 5 people went and said that hurt me in some way, it would be a very binary situation. There wouldn't be any gradient, oh, you had the best interest of the community. All right, it would be like, if we could nail it down to those people that they were hurt by your decision making, they would be less hesitation to drop you. And I think that would scare a lot of practitioners into trying to be very progressive in the way that they actually incorporate new information. Because the thing is, if you go by the book, you're covered. So if I said, you came in the room, you sat for 15 minutes, I said this, if something goes wrong, I'm covered because I did what I was trained to do. I did what the NHS is supposed to do. If I went and then looked at something else that some other people have brought in, no matter how good and how beneficial it is and how community asked for it is, there's no system in place that would, basically save them from anything bad happening. And I think like until that kind of thing changes, it will always be scary for anyone who's meaning well in healthcare, and especially as we're moving into more privatized. If the NHS, the NHS is one of the last barriers to not become the American model, where you would have to be scared, or you'd have to get a £200 bill for someone to come in and say, I did use that data map that was free to access anyway. So yeah, there's a lot of it gets really tricky with that when it becomes that system. But I just thought that would.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point of how that flexibility can be quite scary, as you said, because we think rigidity and planned gives us a sense of safety across the board and also a sense of accountability. But another thing that Rob said that resonates with our work is that we always, well, I say always, a lot of the times we talk about slow, and then fast. That we go very slowly at the very beginning, and there's a lot of just talk and chat and just pure conceptualization. And then we go into, okay, let's start to anchor it down all the way until we have a solid path, and then off we go with the reports. But again, I recognize that we're in a very unique situation. Okay, does anybody else, again, I'm just gonna pause there for anybody else who wants to reflect about the ease or the difficulty with having flexibility, especially being part of other top-down processes. Yeah, Lucy?
Yeah, this just really resonates with me, having started a new position in a local council, that, even something as simple as well, it's not simple at all, but their health and well-being strategy that sits over 2.5 years. What I'm trying to encourage them to do in planning that out is actually leave anything beyond the next 6 months quite opaque, and let our conversations with people and the manner in which we are trying to encourage, with my participation hat on, kind of new ways of being and doing, and keep it quite smudgy. And that's a real departure from how they know how to work, and a huge challenge that becomes more challenging when there's political objectives associated with doing things quickly and needing to evidence change. And so much of the work to embody what I think you're all talking about is changing the way that people within the structures approach their work and their perspective. So yeah, I think it's something that I'm really encouraging, but it's the idea of flexibility presents a real challenge, I think, to just very indoctrinated ways of working. So yeah, this is all really resonating with me, but with just, yeah, I'm learning how much of a long game this is to change some of this, but how can we do it a little bit more immediately? And then I also have a very quick question. If anybody has, thinking about the way that we collect these conversations and who owns them, in order to bring them into decision making. And we have data libraries and research libraries for quantitative evidence, but does anyone have any ways in which they document qualitative evidence and storytelling and these perspectives that we're all talking about in a way that not only is rigorous to build good evidence, but is also reflective of people's stories. So it's just what's going on in my head at the moment.
Cool. Thank you so much for that, Lucy. Does anybody want to answer Lucy's question? I don't know why I think Guppy might have a good feedback on this, but maybe I'm just making that up in my head. I feel like you're good with narrative.
You could like see the my brain going like, that's such a good question.
Yeah.
I think for me, when I think about the kind of connection and evidence and work with both like being asked to be a partner of someone's project, and then also partnering with others and being in like both spaces at the same time. This is not going to sound like I believe that sometimes some things don't need to be recorded, and I think we don't critique enough about what is held as useful evidence and what is respected as intuition or relationship or trust that sometimes you can't quantify or record. And we forget that that requires more investment and time and consideration than the output. So like not thinking so much about the output, but the outcome. And of course, like if we are thinking about science and reporting and providing evidence, it's also in that relationship that enables the leadership of the community to create the evidence they want to create in the way that they want to create it. And that might look very different to what you began thinking of as the evidence needed. And it's obviously also not necessarily the evidence, but it's, you know, the power that they have to be able to self-determine the space that they live in. And that could also come about through a different output or a different outcome than was also anticipated. So I was kind of thinking about that when you asked that question, because I think we sometimes have a preconceived idea about like what the process of research and social change might look like. And we miss, people refer to it as like the like soft infrastructure or the dark matter that like exists in an engaged community process.
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead, Rob.
Sorry, missed the unmute button. We're in discussion with a university and also the Health Foundation as to how we can set up a depository. Obviously, with those sorts of people, it's difficult to work out how, why, who owns it, but we do actually think that those are two places where those questions will be more easily sorted than elsewhere. The only other place we can actually do it is to actually set up something ourselves, but we're not in that sort of realm to do so. But the fact is that we want to keep it open. We want to keep it free access. We want to keep it for the good of the people that need it, whilst maintaining trust, whilst maintaining all the other principles that you've actually come up with. So the Health Foundation has been quite good, and especially Network Q. And the universities should really be in the business of holding and disseminating knowledge so that it's turned into wisdom. Unfortunately, universities in this country seem predisposed to do other things, whereas universities in other countries seem well up for it.
Cool. Thank you for that, Rob. I'm gonna say a couple of things, and I'm going to pass it to Marie if you have any methods on documenting. We are launching, so we have a platform called Know Your Health, which is a partnership with PLP Architects and Kamuzi Lab. And there we are playing around, and I say playing around because we're trying to find our way, where it's a community survey, anybody can take it. To avoid the extractivist part of it, we released it with a free playbook to understand how your health is affected in place. So there's an free educational platform. We are about to start a report based on the data that has been collected. And that's going to be free for the people for everybody, but we're quote unquote, we hold it, as in the data has to go somewhere. But what comes out of it is open to the public. There's another thing that we're playing around with a clean air toolkit, where we're going to start we're putting together a survey, and then we're also thinking about the methodologies and how we're going to do it, of an open survey for any community that's experiencing poor air quality, to start logging their symptoms, so we can then have a UK-wide repository of how air pollution begins to affect people even from those first stages, so they're no longer gaslit and told you're okay. It's below the WHO, so it's fine. And there and I say we, so Marie, Daniel, and I, we've been thinking about how there we make the data open. So as it's evolving, people can see it in real time, to make it even more democratic. But of course, funding pending, and all that kind of jazz. But yeah, we're definitely playing around with democratizing everything. And then MIT, actually, Josh, if you can share the link, because you're the one who sent it to me, MIT created the Neighborhood Study, which is a open study in methods and data collection, but the community does it. So the community does their own data collection. And we want to see it across the board, data collection from the community, and hopefully in the future, data analysis from the community, because why not? Like, we have to stop pretending that we're the only ones with these skills, because if you teach them, then people will have them. So we're experimenting with those things and trying to find a way of how do we truly make it all as collaborative and collective with the community, especially as in the next coming years, we're going to be focusing on very specific communities. So next year, we're going to be doing things like looking at specifically Indigenous health, trans health, women's health, men's health, et cetera. So we're breaking things down where we know that we need to figure this out. So I would say, stay tuned and to see how much we break our head and fail, and what happens when we come out the other side. Then Marie, do you have anything on your expertise of how you would like to see the documentation, but also you're doing a study specifically on green spaces and air pollution? What do you have anything to add in terms of qualitative data, quantitative data, et cetera?
I don't work with qualitative data, unfortunately. Well, this is a limitation, really, because when you work with really large data sets, and you basically just look at the relationships of all these different variables, and then you find weird results, and then that's the end of the story, because you don't have those additional qualitative data that could help you to understand why you find something that is really unexpected, something completely the opposite direction. So that was actually something I was thinking about when we talked about flexibility. As for methodology and also how to share maybe qualitative data, I think that it is in science, at least. I mean, Dan knows more about that, probably open science movements and how to share, make your data that you collected open to basically everyone. I mean, that always comes with some difficulties, I guess, also with data protection, especially if it's qualitative, I assume. I mean, of course, it has to be anonymized. But I think when we look at community engagement and more specific projects, maybe then we don't even need to share it too widely. I mean, even then, a single voice, a single one person basically sharing their experience in that context, then understanding that that is valid and important, and not only because it is maybe not, as we discussed in in our lab, not statistically significant, maybe because it's only one person and it's very difficult to establish statistical significance with that. Just acknowledging that it is still meaningful in that context, I think then you don't even need to kind of share that widely and deposit it. It is just something in that project that is relevant. So yeah, unfortunately, I don't have a better answer for a nice methodology how to actually handle all this, but yeah, that's my thought.
No, I think you've made some really good points, Marie. Are you free to say where you had odd results from a quantitative perspective that the qualitative could have helped?
Yeah, so far in my preliminary results, I look at London and I look at children's mental health and green space, and I would expect on average to see a positive relationship. So more green space, better mental health. I mean, there are many ways to measure both green space and mental health, but that would be sort of the idea. And I found that for some age groups in London, it seems to be that more green space, in particular parks, were linked to higher conduct problems. So showing more antisocial behavior. And that was just a finding that I didn't expect. I would just always assume green space is good, but then you find this. And the data I have are not sufficient to test for kind of confounding factors that may explain that relationship. So for example, one could imagine that in London, maybe there are more parks, but lower quality in more deprived areas, let's say. So maybe there is something about the area where there are more parks that explains why there are always also more conduct problems in children. But I can't really test that. So I don't really know the answer. I can just speculate. And I think qualitative data would be basically talking to the teenagers or the children, or understanding the situation in that they actually live and all the different aspects. That would be really useful to actually understand what's happening. And yeah, that's a limitation. I just can't know. Yeah.
Cool. Thank you so much for that, Marie. It's a tangent, but a really lovely tangent about the significance and the importance of qualitative data, that we don't, degrade it as not being data, because it is. And as Marie said it, even one person giving you their experience is a piece of information, is a piece of data that is worth looking into. So Josh, could you give us the last slide? And if you have any thoughts on flexibility?
Yeah, can I just quickly add to Marie's last point? Very, very quickly, I had the pleasure of interviewing a lady called Binky Taylor from the Brixton Project down in South London. And one of the things we were talking about was the accessibility of Brixton street networks. And one of the things that she noticed that the sort of broader urbanism and urban planning communities fail to recognize is that some children have a whole series of, as she described, like these liminal, these invisible boundaries that prevented them from even accessing certain areas that you'd think to get from A to B was very simple, but they'd actually have to go via C to get to D. And so these invisible barriers existed for children where they'd spend most of their summers on an estate there with an inability to even get to somewhere like Brockwell Park, for example, or even or Burgess Hill Park. So that is as much the importance of not just looking at statistical data to go proximity to green space, but to actually speak with people. And that was a very prescient conversation where she said, well, how do you imagine when you can't move, when you don't have freedom? I thought I'd just add that, but yes, I will now share the next slide.
Yeah, really good point. I mean, whilst you put up the next slide, we had a big, we were doing a project for Guy's and St. Thomas's, and we looked at the data and we had the same thing as Marie. There was no correlation between air pollution and obesity the way that we were looking at the data in proximity. Then we were like, let's do asthma because surely that will create a correlation. Nope, nothing. And so we then had to, again, go back to the drawing board of the flexibility and include the index of mass deprivation. And that's where we realized, oh, right, susceptibility to air pollution and the other factors of the lived experience have a massive variable in how people are going to be affected by air pollution. So there's always really wonderful things and insights that can come if we stay flexible rather than too married to the method. Okay, so this is the last one we are going to discuss. As we said, there are 9 principles, so it's not the last one in general. So longevity, this is the idea of not, and again, we completely understand that some of you obviously have to go in, do it for 2 months, come back out. But if we are really looking at healthy futures and trying to come in and work with communities and really support their health journeys, we do have to consider longevity. So being there, again, in relation with them for a sustained period of time. So developing a long-term partnership, building a community panel for the future, training the community to do their own research. As we talked about, eventually they should become their own scientists and experts, securing funding for future community-led research, and providing employment opportunities. That last one is so important, that we are not just extracting from a community and expecting people to give us their time and expertise and knowledge for free if there isn't going to be something symbiotic to begin with. In return, and that if we are going to honor communities as inequitability, they have to come in at our level. So including them in the grants and or in the budgets that we have, that their expertise and their time is matched is really important. But in general, with the longevity is, yeah, that we stay. So one of the challenges that we saw was, one of the case studies that highlighted this problem is with a community in the United States. They're called the Cancer Corridor. And this has been going on for, if you count from the first time a community member said there's something wrong here because of the amount of cancer cases in the area, it's probably about closer to 15 to 20 years. And this isn't to put blame on the scientists because they are doing what they think they need to do in the supply chain, but there's just a lot of ins and outs of various researchers and scientists coming in and out of this community and going, oh, okay, we're going to study if for sure pesticides are linked to dementia. Are they linked to this cancer? Are they linked to Parkinson's? And there's a lot of good epidemiological work has come from the science being conducted on this community, where we do know that things like pesticides or in their case, their pollution is coming both from industry, but also agricultural pesticides. And so now, because of the studies with them, we do know that there's huge links now between not just cancers, but also various other neurological and neurodevelopmental problems. But the community still has to live there. The community hasn't gotten justice. The community has not benefited at all from this research. And there is something dark or unethical about that, of what is then, should we stay longer with these communities and help them along the solution side or the life part of it, rather than just going, okay, well, we definitely can now go ahead and write this paper, and now we move on to the next project. And how many times do we expect that community to be giving out their time? Because again, with every scientist that comes into them, they have to give 20 minutes, 30 minutes of their time. And that adds up, especially, like I said, if they're not getting absolutely anything in return, which should be at least allyship and advocacy, and being there with them in the campaign process and the lived process. So I'm going to open that up back to, we'll go in reverse. So this time, Marie, what do you think again about this principle of longevity? For example, you are, as you said, you're doing your study on green spaces. You're not working directly with communities, but in an ideal world, what would longevity provide you with as, within that context. And then we'll go to Charlotte of, do you have long-term relationships with some of the communities that you have worked with, and how do you maintain them, and what does that look like? So we'll go Marie first and then Charlotte.
Yeah, so it is actually quite difficult for me to apply it to my own research because I don't work with communities directly. But I mean, just the idea of, if you run a study and you identify a problem, then I will hopefully publish that. So that's important for my own career, obviously. But I mean, yeah, that's, I guess, something that especially young scientists try to achieve, is to have this real world impact, that I have this finding, so what do I do with it? Is there anything I can do to actually address it somehow in London? And because I have the advantage that I look at London only, so it's not the whole world or the whole of the UK, it's really just London, but still, it's where do I start? How do I make this work? So I think it would be really challenging to follow this up, especially when you don't really know what you will do next year. As a scientist, you just move a lot as well. But I think in general, and I took a course on that just this week about responsible research and innovation and technologies, just being really aware as a scientist, as anyone really, as a practitioner as well, as a policymaker, as a researcher, about the responsibilities you have, ethical and social. And I think then looking at community projects and longevity, that you can't just come in, do something, find something, and then leave, right? It feels so unethical to do that, especially if you identify something that needs to be changed. So how exactly this is then possible funding-wise, for example, how do you make sure that you can stay, or that someone can at least follow up on this and to continue to work with the community? Yeah, I don't know how easy it is to actually do it, but I think it is really important from a responsibility perspective.
Yeah, and so there we go back to the systemic factors that can put a bit of difficulty in abiding by some of these principles, but nonetheless, we should be aware of them. So Charlotte, do you want to give some examples of some of the communities that you have sustained long-term relationships with and how you've been able to maintain them?
Yeah, I mean, I think a key thing is kind of, rather than seeing yourself as so I do a lot of work with virtual reality for wellbeing. And for example, I've worked with the Grenfell community since the fire. And rather than kind of offering a service, delivering a service and then leaving, it's about working with the community to set up like what they feel will be helpful for them, and then providing the infrastructure to then have them be able to sustain it themselves. So for example, we've set up like virtual reality hubs, and we train people in the community on how to use all the equipment, and offer them any support that they need with that. And then we kind of, they can do it themselves. We don't need to be there. They're not reliant on us. That, it's they're able to then run it themselves, and then pass on that knowledge to other people in the community. And I think as well, also always having a kind of open line of communication, and developing those relationships where if there are any like problems or issues, they can ring, and if we need support again, if we just kind of have an ongoing relationship with lots of people. And we get approached by people saying, oh, like, I've had this idea about, they've seen what we've done somewhere else and had their own idea, and ask us to support them in their own thing that they can see would be useful. That's very much how it's worked. And again, it's about then providing, you know, our expertise alongside theirs to then come up with a way that they can do the project or implement a system or whatever that they want to address the problem that they've identified, and then we don't need to be involved, you know, enabling them to do that themselves. And then also definitely, like, we've very much like you know, we've employed people from the community multiple times as like a, you know, given them a job because they are the best person to do that job. They know way more than us about loads of things and especially in that context. And, you know, like I was saying earlier about the project that we're currently doing with young women who are affected by gang activity, we've already got kind of one young person who is kind of leading that and who's really you know, we've kind of asked what are you interested in, what do you want to do, what do you want out of it, and they've said, you know, oh, I really want to learn how to do XYZ. So we've kind of tailored the project so that they can gain skills that they want to learn, and then looking at ways which, if we manage to do similar projects afterwards, then they'll be the person who can be employed to then lead that project because they're best placed to do it. So I think, yeah, it's about creating opportunities and kind of giving people the skills, to passing on your skills to people so then you're not needed anymore, if that makes sense.
Absolutely, it really does, Charlotte. Thank you for that. Yeah, so the longevity is very much tied with the community sovereignty and autonomy, that those skills get passed on, and then all you do is you just keep a rapport and a relationship rather than the burden of labor.
Yeah,
right?
I think that's scary for a lot of people, and there's a lot of people that don't do that because then they feel expendable, you know, because it's like, oh, if I'm just teaching those people everything that I know and they're then running it, then what am I here for? But we've found, you know, over and over and over again, people approach us constantly saying, oh, like, you know, oh, I'd like to apply it to this scenario. Would you be able to support us in doing that? Or, you know, it just snowballs. So yeah, and you know, the people that we work with will come up with so many ideas themselves because they're in that environment and they know what needs to happen. They know the problems that they're facing. So yeah, I think it's about kind of removing any ego around it. Yeah.
Well, I think we'll leave you with that moment of Zen of removing the ego from it, because I think that goes across all the principles. So if you guys want to have a more detailed explanation, the report is online. It is, like I said, it's been written by Marie and Charlotte, so you will have their detailed expertise in the report. And it also includes 2 podcast interviews embedded within the report from Professor Elon Kelman, who is a world really expert in crisis and natural disasters. And so he has a lot of experience as well in working with communities. And we also have an interview with Planetary Health Hub, which have another global expertise more on the UN sort of vibes and working with refugees and very at-risk communities. And then the report before that we have community experts being interviewed in that report. So these two reports go together, where you get the people that have worked with communities and also the communities themselves coming into one thought. I will pass it on to Josh now. See you later. Thank you.
I don't really have anything else to say other than thank you very much for everyone to attend. I mean, I do have my own little Jerry Springer moment if people want to listen and contribute to that. But there is a big issue, and I think Priya was first to bring it up, on the role of ownership and governance. And a lot of what we've talked here is process, but a lot of the output really is the role and ownership of communities and citizens within their local environments. And that what was being discussed towards the end was, what are the institutions or the new forms of governance that people coming into a community can help set up that allow communities to own their own domain? And at the moment, there is no form of governance or ownership. And what does exist is incredibly politicized, and it's heavily politicized primarily because it's through land. It's through neighborhood planning groups, and which is the mechanism through which a lot of our urban environment is managed and changed, through which we experience so much. And so much of what we've discussed today, everything I think from what Rob was talking about, the processes of observe, wonder, and explore, well, that is a depoliticized process, because it's not asking, do you want more houses in this area? It's not as being as direct. It's having the insights to understand how to draw out, I guess, sorry, to use the word insights from people around which decision makers are then able to feed that into the more political things that they are used to. We politicize communities, and that is something that we need to remove and allow their own governance to be that control. That was something that I think I've observed through this conversation.
Cool. All right. Well, everyone go and have a wonderful day. And thank you so much for joining us. Bye.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Just to answer your question, Julia, yes, it will be shared. Once we've done a little bit of an edit, it will all go around.
Thank you, because you're super interesting. I'm such a shame I miss it, but yeah, thanks.
Excellent.
Bye.
Take care. Have a good day.
Yeah, you too.